Hey, I'm Joe,
And I'm Spencer.
and this is What's the Gouge, where we give you the gouge on financial issues that concern active military and veterans. But we talk broadly enough that this should interest anyone who has a passion or wants to learn more about sound financial planning. So let's get started. And today's topic, I hope, will be very interesting for you. It was interesting for me because the genesis of it really was an article that I just wrote about a roadmap to financial success. And along with it, we developed a graphic to assist in the article and kind of, I think it lays it out pretty plainly. And so we'll be bringing up that graphic and talking through it. And I thought it'd be interesting that if I sort of picked Spencer's brain and interviewed him in some way about the graphic and get his thoughts on it, really because I put it together based on principles ideas that, to be honest, Spencer trained me on because we have a sort of an interesting dynamic where Spencer came into the financial planning industry first, and me as his father came in later, and sort of he came in and the son trained the father. So it's sort of an interesting story in itself. But let's get going, Spencer. And I want to, before we bring up the graphic, I wanted to ask you a leading question because this is sort of the reason that I started thinking about this article in that, when we get in front of our clients, you often give to them a priority of actions, financial actions to take in life. So just give me your thoughts on why it's important that people put priority on certain actions.
Sure. Well, it's important to create either a checklist or put things in priority just because there's so many things to do in your personal financial life that if you put things in order of priority or just create a checklist for yourself, that makes it much more doable. It creates bite-sized pieces that you can start working towards rather than trying to accomplish everything at once, which may also cause you to neglect some of the more important or more pertinent things by trying to bite everything off at the same time.
Yeah, exactly. And I love the technique because it spoke to me as a 30-year veteran of the Marine Corps, giving me a priority and a checklist. I mean, that feels natural to somebody who's been in the military or a veteran. So we're really helpful for me and really, like I said, sort of the genesis of my idea of putting this together. So let's go ahead and bring up the graphic, and then the folks can see actually what we're talking about here. And I think we'll just keep this up primarily for the entirety of the show or most of it. And but first, so there's a lot of colors and you got a roadmap there. Just let me give you a quick orientation. This really is a graphic that helps the reader in the article with my description of a roadmap to financial success. Okay. And so a lot of colors here and a lot of numbers, but essentially it goes from left to right. And I took a chronological style of talking about the roadmap. It has three different phases: phase one, two, and three. Phase one being the foundation, phase two being building wealth, and then phase three is preserving wealth. So those are very common terms in financial planning. So I kept it simple with that. But let's talk to this a little bit, uh, and I want to get Spencer's thoughts about phase one and the very first topic. And in financial planning, the first thing we want to make sure that clients have is a sound foundation. It's very important as you're building your financial life to have a sound foundation. Without that, the others are really it's really hard to make progress without that foundation. So we always advocate for a 60-20-20 budgeting rule. And again, this was something that, I gleaned off of Spencer. We were teaching our clients. But Spencer, go ahead and give us an idea of what the 60-20-20 is and why it's so important.
Yeah, sure. And there's lots of variants of this rule. It's just a ratio. And I've seen, 50-30-20. I've seen 50-20-30. I've seen a bunch of variants of this rule, but all that the 60-20-20 budgeting rule really describes is the first 60% of your take-home pay being used to take care of those necessary expenses. So the things you need to live. So maybe call that 60 the need. The next 20 is your savings. So as soon as your needs are taken care of, you want to make sure that you're saving or putting away at least 20% of your take-home pay. The other 20%, so that last 20 is the discretionary spending. So these are not the things that you need, these are the wants, right? So leaving room in the budget for going out to the movies or going out with friends or you can also just put that into savings as well if you don't have a use for it. But getting that budgeting done first is what will allow for all of the other steps in this plan. Because if you are constantly overspending, that's going to undo and maybe even worsen some of the other things that we're trying to do on this roadmap to success.
And I agree with that wholeheartedly. It makes total sense, and I will admit that I was not someone who employed this throughout my life, and I saw the consequences of doing that, and luckily I came to my senses later on, and I did employ this. But one of the, I would say, I guess you could call it controversial statements that I make in the article is that until you achieve that 60% number, until you have 60% or less on non-discretionary items, um, you might as well just focus all your efforts on that. I wonder what your thoughts are on that because my thoughts were, you know, uh, until you get your non-discretionary costs down, you're never going to make progress toward build the next stage we want to get you to, which is building wealth. So until you get those non-discretionary um, costs down, really your focus should be on that so that you can make progress on this roadmap. And there's different techniques to get it down. You lower your mortgage, lower your rent. There's all kinds of techniques, but in lieu of not getting down to that 60%, what's going to suffer is either your savings or your discretionary spending. So, I mean, my statement was somewhat controversial, I think, but what are your thoughts on like get to that 60% or just totally focus on that?
Yeah, I don't know that it's super controversial to say. I think the one thing that some folks will bring up, and that I'll probably bring up at times, is step number three. Some folks will say to do that first before anything else, which I don't have a humongous opinion on. I sort of look at phase one as something that you should just do. And I mean, with the folks that we work with, that maybe we take that for granted how good they are at just buckling down and doing something because of the military discipline they have. Um, but I mean, I don't totally disagree with that. I don't think that you really can do the other things that we'll get to on this list, whether it's paying off debt, whether it's building emergency funds. I don't know if you really can do those things unless you have the proper budget, unless you're, spending less than what comes in. So I do think you have to do that first. I wouldn't totally disagree with that.
And here was my thinking is if you can't get your non-discretionary costs down below 60%, then we go back to that priority that we were talking about in the beginning, which is you then have to put priority in the 20% savings and not give on that because that's the really important part. Because if you want to enter into the next stage, which is phase two, which is building wealth, that 20% into savings becomes a critical item. So if there's no way, if you just can't get that non-discretionary down below 60%, say it's 70 or 75% of your costs, then it stands to reason that your discretionary funding, meaning going out, dining, things that you like to do, entertainment, that's the thing that's got to give. But would you agree that the 20% savings becomes the really important part of this?
Yeah, and that's why, even though there's two 20s, the savings, we always refer to it being the second one. Just because, yes, if things are expensive at the moment, people are having a hard time. And if we can't get the fixed costs, the needs down to 60% and we're at 70, 75, maybe even 80, I would still be okay with somebody spending 80% on those fixed costs, saving 20, you just don't get the discretionary. The discretionary really, that last 20 really isn't an integral part of this equation. It's just what's left over. I don't know how sustainable that would be for most people to have no discretionary spending at all for prolonged periods of time. So, or certainly want to work those fixed costs down to that 60%. And there's going to be folks that want to save more or pay off debt at faster than 20% of their take home pay. But I think the biggest thing of that equation is finding a way to get 20% of your take home or at least close to it being either saved or put towards debt, paying that down.
Okay. And so that this brings up sort of an intricacy of this whole roadmap in that when I put together an ideal scenario, meaning, it's chronological in life. And the assumption is I start in my early 20s, with phase one and I move through life. Now, we always come upon folks and that we're advising that are midway through their life and they need to take some steps back because they haven't built that foundation. So, give me your thoughts on, your 30, 40, 45, 50 years old and you don't have that foundation built. What do we do in that case?
I think they start exactly the same as someone in their 20s would. And I don't think there's any shame in doing that because having shame in doing that and not doing it is just going to put it off longer and you're just going to have to start even later. So you're never going to be able to get on track to where you want to be without having that phase one, without having that foundation in place. So, whether you're in your 50s or whether you're in your 20s, you have to have some kind of budget in place that works for you and your family. And I mean, we could go at length about weird scenarios of inheritances or extremely high income. Those people probably aren't in dire need of this, so it's really not its intended audience. And I don't think it's a valuable use of time. So I think for just about anyone, I mean, phase one is just where you have to start. If you don't have phase one done, then you need to get it done.
And I agree with that. I mean, and for more evidence, we've done this with several clients. I mean, we've done this with clients, and we've had them take a step back and look at the foundation, even though they're further advanced in their life. And once they instill that foundation and that discipline, they're amazed at how powerful it becomes. So we've seen real life evidence of that working later on in life. So let's move on to number two, and we'll start progressing through this roadmap. And it's about ensuring adequate insurance. And this one, like I said, you can juxtapose some of these, in life. Sometimes priorities but really, when you have a need for insurance, it's really critical to take care of that. And if you're considering somebody early on who's in their 20s, do they really need life insurance?
Yeah, probably not necessarily. We have always had the philosophy of covering insurance needs at the lowest cost possible. And the fact is there's typically going to be two or three things that folks are looking at to make sure that they have insured, right? So we have the life insurance. This is mainly going to come about when you either are married, you have, kids, someone is depending on you is typically where that life insurance need arises. So if you were to pass away prematurely, is there someone depending on your income? So if you're in your early 20s and you're single, I don't know that there's a large need for life insurance. Again, there's always the exceptions for that. I have life insurance, even though I'm not married, I don't have kids, because the business somewhat relies on me financially. And as my partner, you would be the recipient of that. So there's different situations. But once you have kids, especially young kids, once you're married, these are times to look at adequate life insurance. We're always big fans of just cheap term insurance, which the need will eventually go away as well. So just a cheap term policy for whatever length of time that you need. There's also disability insurance. So looking at, most employers will offer around 60% disability insurance. Just figuring out what you would need if you were to become disabled for any period of time. This doesn't have to include permanent disability. This can be things like cancer diagnosis or anything that keeps you out of work for, really more than 2 years, more than a year. So making sure that if your employer doesn't offer that, trying to secure some kind of disability insurance. And then there's all of the just kind of typical insurances that we see. So the auto insurance, if we have a home insurance, making sure that we have those insurances in place. And again, our philosophy is to do that at the lowest possible cost without sacrificing, the quality of the insurer or some of those other things.
Yeah, and I did stipulate those common for insurance needs, but I also brought up another one, which is I call the cyber slash you know fraud protection, which I have, and I sort of advocate for this because I think the environment in today with the internet and so forth, and I think it's pretty necessary to protect yourself against fraud. I don't know. What are your thoughts on that?
No, I think that's a good point and something that I didn't even think of when going through it. I mean, it's just like anything else. And I think the best thing is that I don't think fraud insurance is very expensive, right? It's not very expensive. I would agree that fraud insurance, any kind of identity protection insurance, would be valuable to add in, and I don't think it's expensive to do so.
All right, well, cool. I think we adequately covered phase one in the foundation, and that foundation is going to carry you through this. I can't reiterate how important having that strong foundation is so that we can now start progressing. And it starts each one of these steps build on the other that make your success more and more probable. So I want to talk about the first two steps in phase two to sort of combined first. Phase two, this is where you're starting to build wealth. Now you've got a firm foundation. Let's start building wealth. And when I first thought about this, I put debt first. That's what first thing that sprung to my mind. And you sort of altered my thinking on this, because when you have debt above 7%, we can talk about above and below 7%. But when you have debt above 7%, it's really just eating you up. You're just paying interest, and it's eating away at your finances, deterring you, preventing you from building wealth. It's just we got to get to a point where debt over 7% is unnecessary in your life. Really, is what we're trying to accomplish. But you brought up the fact that that's very important. But when it comes down to it, that first item that we put number three, contributing up to full employer match. So talk about the employer match and then those two as far as priority.
Yeah, and I would say three and four, attacking either of those as hard as you can is going to be put you in a good spot. So if you did do number four first with paying off high interest debt, that's kind of the Ramsey approach. I don't think that's going to put you in a bad spot. If you have discipline, I'm a fan of getting your full employer match. So we're talking about in a retirement plan, whether that's a 401k, whether that's the TSP, 403b, whatever employer retirement plan you have. If they're matching 3, 4, 5, 10% of your contributions, I'm a fan of getting that employer matching first. When we look at paying off debt versus, saving money, we're usually looking at opportunity cost, right? Everything in life is an opportunity cost. And the fact of the matter is, if something is growing more than what your debt is growing by, so we look at a lot of times we'll look at, do we pay off our mortgage? It's at 3%. Our investments are going to grow at 7%. No, we just keep the mortgage and then we keep our investments growing and outpacing the growth of that. I'm a fan of contributing up to the full employer match just because it's an immediate 100% return. I would maybe reconsider this if there was such substantial debt that you felt like and maybe there was a huge match at work where it was matching up to 22,000 a year or something. There again, there's going to be niche scenarios, but if your employer is matching 3%, I would just throw the 3% into your employer plan, get the match, and then focus everything after that on the 7% and above interest debt.
Yeah, and I want to reiterate, that when we started this out, I told you the genesis of this, peculiar situation. I'm a 30-year Marine Corps retiree, came into the financial planning industry, and Spencer was far and above me in his thinking, in his knowledge, and he trained me in his way of thinking, which is tried and true, but it's really connected to your background in mathematics. You studied mathematics in college. And when you lay these things out for me for the first time, it was really based on these are the numbers. You can't change the numbers, they're facts of life. There's a psychological element to money. We understand that. But when we teach and promote things, we really want to go by the numbers because that's as factual as you can be. We also address some of the psychological factors of money with clients. But in this case, when we're putting together a template, we really want to teach you the basics based on the numbers. And it was so convincing, when you talk to me about debt and being over and below 7% and what you can expect to get in an investment in the market. If you're expecting 7% in the market, or 8 to 7, say 7 to 9 in the market, why then would you pay off a debt that you have that's below that? Because eventually investing in the market is to your advantage. Just look at the numbers. it's sort of going to eat that debt up because the debt is at a lower interest rate. So that's a principle that's important to understand. And then the whole idea of matching your employer's contribution. Um, I'm yet to come upon another avenue opportunity. You talked about opportunity costs. I'm yet to come across another opportunity where you can get 100% return on the money you put in on anything. This is like a guaranteed 100% return. So, just to explain it a little bit fuller, you know, if your employer offers a 5% match of your income, then let's say your income is $100,000, right? So contributing 5% of that per year, $5,000, your employer is going to put in an extra $5,000, but only if you contribute. If you don't contribute, that extra 5,000 from your employer is not going to hit it's not going to hit your account. So why would you give up that 100%? So, all that made perfect sense to me. Any wrap up thoughts on those two issues?
Yeah, and it only works if you have the foundation, right? So if you are spending more than what you're bringing in every month, so if you're not employing the 60/20/20, but maybe you have adequate insurance, maybe you're getting your employer match, it doesn't work, right? Because then you're still building the debt on top of itself while getting that employer match. You have to do phase one. So this works, but you need discipline. So, what I would say is if somebody doesn't have discipline, if they can't trust themselves around money, then, something more similar to a Dave Ramsey approach or something where, it's a little bit simpler would probably work better for that person. But if you have the discipline, you want to go through it the most mathematically efficient way, this is what we believe that to be.
Okay. All right. So number five, you're building 3 to 12 months of emergency funds. We'll go through the basics of that, but this is one I feel so strongly about. I'm totally connected to this one because it has provided so many benefits for me once I got to this. Like when you look, now we've been through stages one and we're up to five. This is where you really start seeing the power of this financial roadmap. This is where things, that wealth building is really starting to happen here. So, to describe it a little bit, you want to build an emergency fund between 3 and 12 months of your non-discretionary costs every month. Okay, so non-discretionary, remember we're talking about mortgage and food, things that support your family and they can't do without. So take 1 month of that cost times three. Now, yeah, I guess give us the textbook answer of why you would either have this variation between 3 months or 12 months. So why would you need that?
Yeah, so and there's really no definitive rule on how you should do your emergency fund. The 3 to 12 months, what that comes from is really an idea that if you were out of work, if you lost your job at work or for whatever reason for a prolonged period, you'd be able to make it 3 to 12 months on that emergency fund. Now, the sort of three variations I've seen on the 3 to 12 months is going to be one, you can do it of just the 60%, just the fixed costs. You could also do it of your entire, 60 and 20, whatever you're spending a month if you want to do that. If you're doing it on just fixed costs, I'm going to tell about a bonus and I think if you want to build up a little bit more. What decides 3 to 12 months, though, really is a couple of things. The first factor is mainly going to be how secure is your current role. So I would say for someone that works in construction, their role is probably less secure than someone who is a nuclear engineer, right? So how high is the demand for that role? How secure is it? I would also say, when looking at 3 to 12 months, how fast could you find another role if you were to be displaced from that role? So again, maybe if you're in construction, you feel very strongly that your city's booming and you're gonna be able to find another job very quickly. Maybe for that nuclear engineer, it's actually going to take a while to find that next role because there's not a lot of the roles that they're looking for. Now, I don't think that'd be true for a nuclear engineer these days, but just saying if you're in a very specialized industry and there's not a lot of openings at any given time, that may be another thing that stretches you closer to that 12 months. And then the third thing is, are there any transitions coming up that you know about? So regardless of what kind of role you're in now, if you're going to be making transition, if you're going to be moving, if you're going to be leaving your job for another one, even if you're going to be in the next career in a day. We always inch that emergency fund a little bit higher. So
Hmm.
again, if you are in an industry that there's just huge demand for, maybe that's nuclear engineering, maybe that's software engineering, whatever you feel like has huge demand, and you feel like you're not very replaceable, you have good job security, then you're probably closer to that 3 months. If you are in a job that's very replaceable, or you feel like it would be hard to find again, maybe you're close to that 12 months. The bonus that I'll throw on top of that, if you really want to be secure and you want to have that large emergency fund, is you could build up that 3 to 12 months plus your deductibles. So the deductibles on those insurances that we talked about in
Hmm.
step two. So if we have a
Hmm.
$1,000 auto deductible, we can build that in. If we have, healthcare deductible of 5,000 a year, we can build that in on top. It's really all sort of fungible. Usually when we have folks do the 60% fixed and the 20% discretionary, we don't worry about it as much. If you're going, my 60% cost every month for my fixed cost times three, then we probably want to build in those deductibles on top of that as well.
Hmm.
So it's up to the person how they want to do it. I would say if you really want to be in a good spot, take your fixed costs plus your 20% discretionary, so maybe 80% of your take home, and then multiply that by 3 to 12. And I think that puts someone in a pretty good spot from an emergency fund standpoint.
All right, excellent. And so I think the principle there, basically, if you put it simply, is sort of the higher your the higher your uncertainty in life, whether it be from transition or a irregular job where the work is maybe seasonal. So the higher the uncertainty in life, the higher your emergency fund should be. I want to talk about the other power of the emergency fund that I always promote. Not every financial planner I think is going to promote this, but I think it's just a phenomenally powerful tool. And because I think that it helps with that the whole debt aspect. Because what I promote is once you have that firm um, emergency fund, that then becomes your credit card. So if something unexpected comes up, your refrigerator goes out, and you didn't plan in those costs, but you got to buy a new refrigerator. Would you rather finance that refrigerator at 18 to 27% on a credit card, or would you rather take it out of your emergency funds, fund it yourself, and then pay yourself back? I think that's a very powerful tool of the emergency fund. It does dip into it a little bit, but it's for a priority in life that you need. The priority kind of goes back, that refrigerator almost becomes a non-discretionary cost. You need a new refrigerator. You got to get it somehow. Why would you want to pay all that debt on it? Just borrow from yourself. What's your thoughts on that?
No, I totally agree. And if you look up through stages 1 through 5, what are these stages? Really, it's escaping debt. It's getting out of debt, and it's putting yourself in a position not to go into debt again. And so when we look at 1 through 5, those are probably where most Americans are, and it's probably the hardest steps to do. Once you do 1 through 5, everything becomes much, much easier. The rest of the path, people would be really shocked, how quickly those develop, I would say.
It really is. And I made the statement somewhere in the article, and it will be published here soon, basically to say, once you get to a certain point on this, your success is inevitable, as long as you stay on this path. And I believe that strongly. And this is the point at which you really feel the power of both that foundation and the initial phase 2 actions, and that building wealth just happens naturally at this. If you just stick to the 60-20-20 at this point, that you're going to build the wealth regardless. The wealth building is going to happen. Now the next step, number 6, I think, in my opinion, is we take some liberties in our financial planning which we think are very sound. They're mathematically solid. They do play on the psychology of money with a Roth IRA and what it's for and what you can do with it. We lean into the practicality of it, the flexibility of it for using that Roth IRA for different things in life other than just a retirement account. I know there'll be some planners that say, keep the sanctity of those retirement savings in there, and don't say, now we don't want you to spend out of your Roth IRA, but it's got multiple uses. So just give us your concept on number six there, why it's important, because if we go and look back to number three, we're talking about the ideal scenario, somebody who has access to a profit sharing plan at work, a 401k, so forth. So they've contributed, the first step was getting that match because you don't want to miss that 100% return on money, right? So get that match. Why not just continue to contribute more to your work sponsored? Why would you flip over and now the priority is a Roth IRA?
Yeah, and there's a couple nuances here, and we could go deep down the rabbit hole, but I'll try to keep it simple. When we talked about number three, contributing up to the full employer match, what we didn't mention is the complexity of, in this day and age, in most employer plans, you can contribute either pre-tax or Roth, which I think is a whole nother video. It's on its own and just a whole nother kind of complicated issue. What I'll keep for today is that in your employer plan at work, not always, but usually, you can either put in pre-tax or Roth dollars. What we are making the assumption of here is that you are not at your highest earning potential yet when you're up through stage 6 in the roadmap. If you are at your highest earning potential, you're probably a little bit further down the roadmap, and so this doesn't even matter at this point anyway. If you're not at your highest earning potential, a Roth IRA is beautiful. Any kind of Roth savings is, meaning that when we're contributing to that employer plan in step number 3, Roth is probably going to be the priority. Again, you might have a unique situation. When we get up to number 6, the Roth IRA is going to function very, very, similarly to how the Roth 401k does. There's going to be no practical difference in terms of how they're taxed. The main difference is that in the Roth IRA, you're going to have freedom to invest in whatever you want, which could be good or bad depending on how disciplined people are. The other thing is that you're going to have a lot more control over how it's used and actually withdrawing from it. So, as an example, let's say you've got through steps 1 through 5, and now you have some extra dollars. Maybe you have an extra $100 a month, and you want to put that into either your employer plan or into a Roth IRA. Well, if you throw that into your Roth 401k at work, what happens to that $100? It's now in that Roth 401k and it's locked up. There's no way that you can reasonably pull it out unless you have a hardship withdrawal or some kind of exception to that rule. If you throw that $100 into your Roth IRA and then something comes up and you need that $100 back, you can pull that out at any time. There's no penalties for doing so, and you're pulling out money that you already paid taxes on, so there's no taxes on it. So, we like this almost as a second emergency fund as well. When you have that emergency fund fully built up, when you're throwing money in your Roth IRA, we don't ever want to take that money out, not until retirement if we don't have to. But it's absolutely a great way to be a little bit more secure so that we never have to revert back down to earlier steps, earlier phases in the chart. We have that sort of secondary emergency fund building, and it has multiple purpose. So we're wanting to leave it to grow for retirement. If we go to purchase a home and we need more funds to do that, there's exclusions where we can pull out some gains for purchase of a home, first year you have a child, some stuff like that. A Roth IRA, I think that's for another video why the Roth IRA is great. But yeah, after you finish with step 5, the priority, there's just more flexibility and more advantages in our eyes to contributing to the Roth IRA versus a Roth 401k.
Right. Okay, so we'll bookmark that Roth IRA for a future episode. That'll be a good one. But to embellish a little bit on the Roth IRA in itself is some of the unique things about it is it's very versatile. Meaning you were talking about the principal you put in. So you put in $100 principal. You can always take that out. Now the gains, once that starts having gains on that $100, it's sort of locked in there unless if you pull that out early, it's going to have some penalties and taxes on it. Okay. But the principal you put in is always accessible to you. And the fair thing, one thing, you can talk about the IRS all you want, but one thing about the IRS and the rules that they create, they are fundamentally fair for the American from what we've found. And so what they say is in a Roth IRA, when you withdraw from your Roth IRA, they always assume that you're pulling principal first so that you don't get penalized. Is that correct?
That's correct. And maybe we should clarify the rules are always fair outside of maybe how much they tax in the first place, but that's more of a Congress issue. But in terms of how
Sure.
they apply, yes, they're almost always fair. They're always going to assume when you pull money out that you're pulling it from your principal. It works exactly how you would think it would work.
Okay. So Roth IRA is just a very powerful tool. We love it. That's why in the priority of things, it lands on number six. Okay. So, and you also talked about, again, this is an ideal scenario. So you're in a certain place where you have to think about the prioritization of the next dollar, and the next dollar goes into Roth IRA. So let's now say that we're getting that employer match. We are able to max out that Roth IRA. And if we're married, max it out not only for ourselves, but for our spouse. But even before we are able to max it out, we might want to jump to this next priority because everybody's life is different. And the next thing that came to my mind after the Roth IRA is we have things in life that we want to accomplish. We have goals. And that's one of the big things. I mean, as a financial planner, we dwell on that. We want to know what your goals are because ultimately, one of the biggest jobs of a financial advisor is to help clients to achieve all those goals, to be successful in their financial goals. So, once you've got that foundation and now your savings are pretty well set, now you want to save for those goals. And so I listed here mid and long-term goals. Tell us a little bit about, when I thought of, and even short-term, so short-term would be something like a trip, something less than, you're saving for less than a year. Midterm would be more like up to 5 years. So it could be, a new vehicle or a house, the down payment on a house. And, the long term could be something like your children's education. Long term is also retirement, but let's put that aside. That's a long term goal, but we'll chisel that one out. So just think of long term maybe in the aspect of you're saving for your children's education. So tell us about the now the transition from you got your savings all set and now you want to start reaching those goals. And it's just the statement save for these goals. Tell me a little bit about your thoughts of how to save for these.
Yeah, and the beauty is that there are specific accounts for saving for some of these goals as well. So some of the big goals, I think of the first time home purchase or just another home purchase. There's not really an account specifically for that. But then some of the other main ones. So there's the HSA, the health savings account, which is a great vehicle to look at. Could maybe even argue that it should be before the Roth IRA, but just for simplicity, we have it at number seven here. There's the 529 college savings plan, which you can use to save for either your own or someone else's college savings. So after you're contributing to your Roth IRA and ideally maxing it out every year, this is a great time to look at either some of those other accounts or just setting money aside in just a regular investment brokerage account or just in savings, additional savings, depending on when that goal is going to be. So usually we'll say something in the short term, 0 to 2 years out. We're looking at just putting that into savings, into a high yield savings, into a CD, something that's going to be liquid and not very volatile there in those 2 years. Something 2 to 10 years out, that's when we can start looking at, the just taxable brokerage account where we're putting money in to a diversified fund, keeping it simple, but then getting it less and less aggressive as that time horizon approaches. And then something 10 plus years out, that's again, we're probably looking at the taxable brokerage account for saving and investing for some of those goals. And then just keeping in mind some of those specialized investment accounts for the college savings like the 529 or like for healthcare costs like the HSA. Those are all really good things to look at in step seven. A lot of people are going to argue that the HSA should be done before the Roth IRA, and I wouldn't totally disagree with them. But just again, for simplicity of this roadmap, those are all things that we look at in step seven.
Yeah, obviously there's intricacies to everyone's specific situation, but again, we're just laying out the roadmap here. And I often say that I love the idea of a CD or a high yield savings, for a midterm, but I really love the idea of that investment account, um, because it's got such if you think a Roth IRA has flexibility, an investment account has great flexibility because you can put money in, take it out at any time. Yes, it's less tax efficient, but it's a really good vehicle to really to get a good gain on your savings to propel you forward in reaching those goals. So let's move on from that. So now that you're on your way, let's say you're moving further along the roadmap. You've got your down payment for your house, okay, and now, you're becoming more and more successful in life, and you've got more. That 20% of savings starts getting larger and larger because in the ideal situation, you're making more money. So that 20% portion starts to grow. And now, so our next step to building wealth is contributing maximum to your employer plan. So you've taken care of all these priorities, and the plan, the roadmap is always about what is most efficient for that next dollar. So think about deploying that dollar. You want to deploy the next dollar smartly. So we talk about contributing the maximum to the employer plan. So what is the genius of doing that, or why does that take priority?
Yeah, and I should first point out that we're making this look very linear, but there's probably for most people a very large time difference between steps 7 and 8. So if you get through steps 7, you are in a fantastic spot because not only have you gotten out of debt, you're in a spot where you're likely not going back into debt, at least bad debt. You're maxing out your Roth IRA, so you're in a good spot for retirement. You're getting your full employer match, and you're saving for your mid and long-term goals that are prior to retirement. So you're already in a fantastic spot. So these, the step 8 is almost sort of the showboat victory lap step, if we want to call it that, where okay, we're already on track for all of our goals. Let's worry about being efficient now. And so when you're putting, once you're on track for your goals, if you're putting more dollars away, you might as well have those growing as efficiently as possible. And by efficient, I mean tax efficient. So we could throw those extra dollars into a taxable brokerage account or into savings, but those are all going to accrue taxable gains. If we can throw those dollars into our employer plan, then those will grow much more tax efficient. If we're on step 8, this is also probably a time in our life where we're ready to start looking at should we be doing pre-tax contributions or Roth contributions? Because if you're saving so much that you're in a good spot, you're on track for all your goals, and you're working towards maxing out your 401k or TSP or 403b, then you're probably at a pretty high income, at least higher than what you started at. And it may make sense to start doing pre-tax contributions instead of Roth, which is also going to lower your current tax bill. But it might also make sense to do Roth. It really depends on your individual situation. And maybe we'll do a video about that in the future, when to do Roth and when to do pre-tax. But this is such a good step to be at if you work towards maxing that out, or even if it's just increasing your contribution. Maybe you were doing 3% and you work it up to 5 or 10%. It doesn't have to be maxing it out, but this is really kind of the last step. If you get through all the way through 8 in your building phase, that phase 2, I mean, there's really not a lot more you can do after that. The only other thing would just be throwing extra dollars into a taxable brokerage account or setting it aside, or whatever you like with it, really. Because if you get up through 8 and you complete all those steps, you're ahead of, I don't know the exact number, but I would think the vast majority of Americans in terms of your saving journey.
Right, you're in a very good spot. We'll bookmark that one, Roth versus pre-tax for a future show. But like I said at the beginning of our podcast or our YouTube channel, we really focus on military and veterans in our business. So I just want to bring that aspect in, and there's a thought that always comes to mind at this point is that it's a pattern we see all the time. It was my pattern, to be honest with you, is you know phase 1 and 2. I was not diligent. I was not good at this my whole career because I relied, I knew that, at some point I had a pension to rely on, and sort of I put too much effort and less effort into the saving and the fundamentals here. And a lot of us do that, and we get to the end and we retire, and now we've got that asset of a pension, maybe even some disability pay, and now we're possibly late 40s, somewhere in the 50s, plenty of more time to get another job and earn some high income. So what I'm saying, when you take a veteran's look at this, of someone who's done a full career and now has a pension, often get to this spot where where if they, like myself, if I haven't taken care of all these fundamentals, you can take care of them pretty quickly when you have extra money coming in, when you have a pension to rely on and you've got another income, so your income's relatively high. So we have a lot of veterans that get to the point of, okay, I've retired, I have this pension, I have this new job. Let's take care of the foundation because I didn't do the savings that I should have during my whole career, and now it's catch up time, right? So this is, a fantastic time for veterans to catch up on their savings because they have a lot of illiquid asset in a pension, meaning, that pension is going to come every month. But what if something big happens? You need an asset of liquid money. You need money set aside. You need savings. So this is your time to catch up. So I know you've seen that in that pattern repeat its many times. Any thoughts on that at all for veterans?
Yeah, no, and we see that all the time, and the veterans that do get a pension, not all veterans get a pension and do a full career, of course, but the veterans that do get a pension, that can certainly be an eraser of not following this for most of their career, because the fact is that pension is hugely valuable, and so it sort of can undo some of the wasting this. But I do want to add in as well, um, especially for the veterans or active duty that are not going to be receiving a pension, just because you don't have a super high income, just because you're not double earning with a pension and this can work for anyone as long as you do step number one, right? So as long as you get the 60/20/20 under control, it doesn't matter how high your income is, as long as you get started early with that 60/20/20. Now, if you wait till you're 60 and then you employ the 60/20/20 and your income is not high enough to erase some of your mistakes, then you might be in a tough spot. And that is the unfortunate truth is that more money will be able to erase some kind of bad behaviors early on, but as long as you start early in your 20s and your 30s, and as long as you employ that 60/20/20, all of these things will likely be achievable. Maybe not maxing out the employer plan, but all of these things will be achievable in time. And I think it's easy these days to throw the excuse of it's too expensive. I'm going to take inspiration from our military clients that we work with, and you just got to get it done. If that means living with a roommate, if
Hmm.
that means eating top ramen, if that means never going out, you just got to get it done. It takes priority over everything. You have to employ that 60/20/20 rule. If you employ that 60/20/20 rule, you'll be able to get through phase one and phase two in a really good spot. Even if that means not totally maxing out every number, especially number eight. But 60/20/20 will lead you to success in phase one and phase two.
Yeah, that's great. I love going back to that early principle in that you get that 60/20/20 in place, regardless of where you are in life. You now can start accelerating your progress on that roadmap to financial success. And we also often joke about there are people that stumble into $1 million. It happens, but not often. Don't That's not a plan. Okay. So at some point you got to get back to that basics. You got to get on that 60/20/20, and that statement stands true. Once you get that in place, it's going to accelerate your wealth building and so forth. So, all right, we'll wrap this up here in phase three. This phase of discussion is going to be shorter because it's in reality, this is where the financial planner really starts adding value for the client. This is when the client really needs a financial planner, in my opinion. It gets really complex up here, and it gets complex because of all the different intricacies of the tax code, the requirements at these, the specifications of retirement accounts and when you can do this, and Roth versus pre-tax. There's just a lot, and this one's perfect for a mathematician. I mean, this is your sweet spot because this is all about math. So one of the big things in the first step, a lot of these phases kind of meld together, and as you're approaching phase three, we talk about initiating an investment portfolio glide path. So explain what the glide path is, explain about the why it's important and the power of it.
Yeah, so all that a glide path means is that as you get closer to actually withdrawing from an account, so whether that's usually we're talking about retirement, so maybe you're going from 30 to the age of 40 to the age of 50, you're getting closer to retirement. This can also apply to those short, mid, and long-term goals. So maybe the goal is 10 years away, now it's 5 years away, now it's 2 years away. As we get closer to that goal, we typically want to get less and less aggressive with our investments. And what I mean by aggressive is less and less exposure to stocks, right? Because we've all seen the graphs of the stock markets. They go way up, they go way down, they go way up, they go way down. And when we're trying to make withdrawals for something, whether that again be a midterm goal, whether that be we're now in retirement and need to withdraw. When we're needing to make those withdrawals, we don't want big, I mean, if it shoots way up, everybody's okay with that, but we don't want those big market crashes or that volatility to impact what we're able to withdraw from and undo all of that work we did saving and investing for all those years. So, what are our options? The first option is just to try to guess basically when we need to sell some of the stocks, get more conservative, have some cash and some bonds. That's really not usually a good game plan, and there's been plenty of studies on this. If your retirement is in 5 years and you're just going to try to guess what the high point in the market is, most people can't do that efficiently. I've never seen someone that really can do it predictably. So really what we usually preach is what's called a glide path. And all that means is that as you approach that goal, you're getting less and less aggressive. You're selling stocks systematically a little bit every year. And that way, there's going to be years that are up, and that'll work well for you. There's going to be years that are down, that won't work as well, but you'll be somewhere on that average, right? You're basically dollar cost averaging, if folks are familiar with that concept. You're basically dollar cost averaging your declining aggressiveness with your portfolio. And so we're big believers in the glide path. It mathematically produces the most efficient, retirement planning, the highest probability of success when it comes to the goal planning. And so, that's a place where either you can work with an advisor and they can implement that. There are also the do it, or done for you funds like the target date funds that you just pick the date that the target date says. So maybe it's a target date for 2040, and that's when my goal is, and it will do that for you. We have opinions. Maybe we can break those down in a later episode as well in terms of the fees for those or the efficiencies or how they're managed. There's a lot of kind of intricate and really complicated stuff there, but they're better than doing nothing, than just picking, say, the S&P 500 and just letting it ride, which will get you to a spot, but not as well as if you had some sort of glide path implemented.
Right. So for the self-doer, the life cycle funds are typically a good thing, even though it does have a cost to it. If you want to set and forget, it's a really good way of doing that. And I just wanted to, before we move off of this step in phase three, I just wanted to talk about sort of the tipping point of this and your thoughts on that, because if you're in your 20s and you got your 60-20-20 all together and you're putting away, it's like really just do that 20% savings, get it into a diversified portfolio, and just do that. You're on your own. There's not much manipulation. You have to do that. At some point, finances get a little bit more intricate in that, and you come to a point where it now becomes in your favor to manage it more and get on that glide path. And it's different for everyone, but just in general, talk about where that glide path sort of starts becoming important at what age and in the typical scenario.
Yeah, and I would say you could start a glide path in your 20s and pick one of those target dates. It's just not the priority. So this roadmap is all about priority. And early on, when you don't have the savings or the investments built up, the priority is just to throw that money in there and build that as quickly as you can. I mean, worst case scenario, if you were just putting it all in cash, you're probably still massively ahead of the person that's not saving properly, but has picked out the perfect funds at the perfect level. The priority really is to get that money put away. As you start shifting, a lot of times I mean, it's really about a progress more than an age, but we usually see it as early as in folks' 30s, especially early 40s maybe, where you start to actually build up some wealth. So once you have, 50,000, 100,000, 150,000 in investments, this is a good time to start looking at, how am I invested? What is my glide path for these different goals? And that's when it really starts becoming important. Prior to building that up, it's really just a matter of throwing away, as much or throwing as much money into these accounts as possible. And then you can really start getting nitpicky about the actual allocation and how you're utilizing a glide path. But that glide path, I would say, becomes integral. You need to start focusing on it when you're within 10 years of a goal. So whether that be a midterm goal or whether that be retirement, you got to start looking at a glide path, if not now, soon.
Okay, perfect overview of the glide path. So I want to review a little bit because we're almost on the last step here. And we've taken a comprehensive look at the roadmap, and we've just touched on all these topics. And I'll say this, I've said, that we should bookmark a couple and come back to it. But honestly, we could come back to each one of these steps and do at least a 30 to 60-minute show on each one of these steps. Um, and but when we get to step 10, there's a lot bundled in that, and we're just going to skim on it today because that's where things start getting really complex because we're talking about employing strategic tax um, or tax strategies that keep your taxes as low as you can, in your favor, and doing efficient withdrawal actions. And there's a lot of complexity up there. So whereas we could do a 30 to 60-minute broadcast on any one of those topics and cover them in pretty good detail, this one we could probably do 40 different 60-minute topics on the different issues in here. So I just really want to touch on this one and then we'll wrap it all up for today. So I'm just going to throw it at you. That the saying employ tax and withdrawal efficient actions is is a tough question to answer really quickly, but just give us an overview of that and we'll take it to the end here.
Yeah, I'll just give the topics, and I think they'll all have to be their own separate videos. But when we talk about tax efficient, withdrawal efficient actions, we're talking about contributions, whether we're doing pre-tax or Roth, which can maybe be done a little bit earlier as than step 10 as well. But we're talking about, Roth conversions. So that's certainly something we'll make a video about in the future of when to convert funds that are pre-tax into Roth. We're talking about when we do withdraw, what accounts are we withdrawing from first. We likely have funds in our Roth IRA. We likely have funds in a taxable brokerage account. We likely have funds in 529s or HSAs. We're talking about where do we actually pull that money from? How do we utilize those accounts? And we're talking about Social Security timing. When do we elect Social Security? What's the most tax efficient time to do that? There's just so many things in this. And we put it last year because it's super important. But if you don't do these other things, then you're not going to have a lot of options in arena number 10 here. So I'll just give those topics there, and then I think they'll have to be their own videos in the future. This is where an advisor actually makes his money is number 10 because it's so complex, and that you can thank Congress and the IRS for. But
Absolutely, and that's a good overview of a very complex step right there that we hope to investigate in a lot of detail in future shows. So, to recap, this is the roadmap to financial success. The article will be hitting our blog here very soon, so I hope you take a look at that. And the great thing about this is after we put it together, I really conceived of this is, we're a lot about giving back and trying to provide financial literacy, financial education. So beyond our business as taking care of clients, secondary, we always want to contribute to others and provide for them financial literacy and financial education. And we're open to doing events and seminars or whatever we can to get in front of folks at any stage of their life and give them this type of information. So, I conceived of it as, say, for example, we were getting with junior military members. We give them an overview of the whole roadmap, but we would focus on that phase one because that's where they are in life. If you come to someone who's mid-career, again, an overview, but you're really looking at that building wealth. And then finally, this phase three, remember, this is preserving your wealth. So it's really talking about a time in life where you're either retired or you can retire and preserving that wealth that you've built. So, anyone obviously and going toward that transition of retirement, we would focus on that phase three. So I think it's a great tool, and we look to use it and in further financial literacy and education in the future. So, great overview, Spencer. I appreciate your tolerance of me interviewing you on this because I felt that would be important because honestly, I'll give you all credit that in learning all of these philosophies and the fundamentals of this, I really relied on you, and I appreciate the knowledge you've given me. So that's going to wrap it up for today. Any final thoughts for us today, Spencer?
no, I would just say that you've done an excellent job synthesizing this down the 10 kind of biggest topics here. I would have wanted to make it 100 steps long because there's so many little intricate things that you could do in between or on each of these steps. But at the end of the day, these are the 10 biggest thing things. If somebody just did these 10 things, didn't do anything else well, they would be in an excellent position. They would achieve, I think, most of their goals. So this is a really good roadmap for people either just starting or somewhere along the midpoint of their journey.
All right, so that's a big and comprehensive piece of the financial gouge that we provided for you today. I hope you enjoy it. Tell your friends about it. We think people can benefit from this. We look very optimistically to diving into some of these topics in the future. But until next time, we'll see you later and look for our next episode. So take care.